Welcome to Education Talks. I'm David Burke. Dr. Tassos Anastasiades is a highly experienced international schools leader with a focus on inspirational leadership, developing world-class teams, innovation, and 21st century skills. He is currently the principal at Ningbo Huamao International School. Tassos believes he has been fortunate to have led schools and staff across the world, resulting in a diverse understanding of cultural differences, governance, and educational practice. A prolific writer, publishing his thoughts on education to a vast online audience, it was a real pleasure to have him share his thoughts on Education Talks. Well, Tassos, welcome to Education Talks. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, David, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on your program.
Wonderful. Where are you joining us from?
At the moment, I'm in China. I'm in a place called Ningbo, which is a couple of hours from Shanghai.
Wonderful. How long have you been there?
To be honest, David, we arrived just at the end of the pandemic when China was still under lockdown, and it was quite an experience actually reaching China. At the time, this was since last August. It just seems like yesterday, but at the time there were lockdowns. We had to take various flights. I remember being in Paris and having to take double PCRs, at a very high cost, having to wait 24 hours to see if it was negative, extortionate flights. I think it was something like $3,000 to fly from Paris to Beijing. Then we were stuck in Beijing in quarantine, quite an experience for, they told us 7, but then it was 7 plus 3, 10 days. I think it's the first time I've ever been locked up in a room by myself for 10 days. Now it's perfect. Overnight, suddenly they lifted up the quarantine. We went through a few infections and it's back to normal. And it's, lovely spring weather now. So, yeah, it's great.
Wonderful. Let's hope those days of quarantines are behind us. I did it a couple of years ago when I arrived in South Korea during the pandemic. And it's a tough times, and let's hope that's behind us. So great to have you on the program. I wanted to ask you, you're an experienced educational leader. You've worked in many countries with many professional achievements. But I want you to sort of give viewers and listeners a bit of an overview of your career in education.
Yeah, thanks for asking, David. It goes back quite a long way. Back to the 80s, actually. I even remember the national curriculum being introduced, and I think at the time, I think it was early 80s, I was a very enthusiastic science teacher, part of the science school review, which was trying to be innovative in the way of teaching science, so that it wasn't textbook based. And I mean, this was many years ago. That was in the UK after I completed my PhD in biochemistry at Nottingham. And while I was writing up my PhD, at the time we had to get a typist to type it. And being a poor student on a measly grant, I couldn't afford a typist. So I took on a part-time job in a science school. I was dumped straight into a low ability maths class in Leicestershire. And anyone would think that was complete and utter suffering. And I remember coming into this class, a PhD biochemist, and having to teach fractions. And I couldn't remember how to teach fractions, believe it or not. I couldn't remember how to add fractions. And that was my inspiration, because low ability class, they taught me how to teach fractions throughout that lesson. And just developing that relationship with the students who just wanted to be listened to, just sold me into teaching. And that was the beginning of my teaching career in the UK. And since then, it's become very global. I mean, I spent quite a long time in the UK training. I moved to Rutland as a biology teacher in the very green area of Oakham. And I think it was in the 90s when there was a massive recession in the United Kingdom. Probably the readers, probably listeners, probably remember it. Thatcher times, everyone just dived, repossessed houses, and it was just a chaotic time to be in the UK. So we decided just to sell up and leave the UK. Education wasn't really going the right way. And we ended up in Cyprus, a very small school in Cyprus, where I really started my career again as a science teacher. And we were only there a couple of years because at the time the salaries were very poor. I think it was something like 300 Cyprus pounds for a family. And I remember meeting somebody from the Middle East in the says, "Why don't you try going to the Middle East? There's some great jobs in the Middle East." And at the time we had to write letters to the Times Educational Supplement. So I wrote my letters, and I was invited to interview in London. I remember the hotel very well. Ended up getting a job in Bahrain with my family and 3 children, and there we went. We went across to Bahrain, which is now one of the most outstanding schools in the Middle East. It was a school called St. Christopher's. I spent 4 years there really developing my career. Fantastic opportunities. It was a great school where our children had a great education. And I met some great colleagues, and it was my first introduction to global education. It was just inspirational to be overseas and realize that actually students did love learning and they were passionate about learning. I then had a promotion opportunity, and this is what spurred me into leadership. I was invited by a colleague from Egypt who wanted to start up a school in Cyprus, in Limassol, and he wanted me to go as the bilingual head principal of school. So I went from head of biology straight to principal. Quite a small school, bilingual Greek and English, and that really was my introduction to real international education leadership. From Limassol, we had an opportunity to go to Malaysia. So we spent a few years in Malaysia, and again, that was my introduction. I met a great guy called Ray Davis, who then went on and was head of CIS. He introduced me to accreditation. We took a very large school in Malaysia, nearly 2,000 kids through accreditation, but we met lots of different cultures, Asian nationalities. So we spent about a while there, and being globally smitten, still with family, I had an opportunity in Zambia, and this was really a short opportunity to help a school in Zambia develop their curriculum. Again, a fascinating experience, straight into from Malaysia, which was well developed, a completely undeveloped Zambia, working with teachers that were on $30 per month. By then, my children were getting to university age, and they were with us all this time, 3 children. So we decided to spend a period back in the UK so they could get their fees for the university, home fees, etc. Perhaps professionally, not a wise decision, because once you've been to places like Bahrain, Zambia, Malaysia, and taught overseas, Cyprus, and you go back into Southampton, into an inner city school, I think after 2 years, perhaps, even my innovative methods and trying to get on with students, that perhaps was a low in my career. And we definitely made the decision after 2 years, this isn't a place that we could work. Rapidly going through the rest of my career. So we landed back in Cyprus, which was really our second home, although we're British. We thought, let's go back to Cyprus. I worked again as a science teacher in Cyprus, but then helped develop a school in Paphos, a small school, but again, very, very small. From then, I wanted to go again globally and more into leadership and develop my leadership career and also give back because I by then had developed a lot of experience. And there was an opportunity in Nigeria, and it was some entrepreneur. He had this vision to develop the best school in Nigeria, and he set up this unbelievable building and infrastructure, and he recruited all the best Nigerian students and leaders of the world. But as misfortune happens and as risk happens when you're overseas, it was I was going to arrive there in July, but he passed away in June, so I never actually met him other than at the online interview. I spent a fantastic year in Nigeria in the infrastructure, the buildings, but um, things are very different in Africa. And the leader had gone, and the politics had remained, but I'd learned a lot. I would never regret going there, and it wasn't as dangerous as people say. And the children are possibly the best children I've ever taught. That leads me to my UAE experience, where I spent 6 years, uh, worked with groups of schools, quality assurance, developing schools inspections, KHJ inspections, also the principal of a school, developed my leadership a lot in those schools, particularly in one of the schools, I think it was Dubai International Academy, and something like 89 nationalities, very much
Wow.
global. After my 6 years, we then dropped into India for a couple of years, leadership, IB, development of a school, and then 2 years in India, and then COVID hit. We were isolated by the Royal Bombay Yacht Club. We decided we wanted to leave India at the time. 2 years into COVID, it was the worst scenario. You can imagine what was going on in India. We were then locked down. We managed to get an escape route. At that time, I didn't have a job. And the only way that I managed through my networking, and this is where networking is important. I managed to meet a colleague in Kosovo. And the only way I could continue my career is I managed to get a taxi from Athens, where we had an escape flight to Kosovo by taxi, a couple of taxis, and we managed to get across the borders and into Kosovo. And I helped him develop the Finnish curriculum and put Cambridge into the Finnish curriculum. That was a short-term contract, very small school, but a fantastic experience. And then a colleague through LinkedIn again contacted me and said, look, I know it's a difficult time, but I've got 7 schools in Saudi Arabia here. We need someone like you to help. Saudi is going through change. The heads are now wanting to become more international. The men and women are wanting to learn innovation, child protection. So I went there on a 1-year contract to train the heads, men and women, 7 schools. Again, a fantastic experience. And then from there, it brings me to my present position in China. So quite a
Extraordinary.
global,
Quite a global experience. Yeah. Now, I'm sure people ask this question a lot, but is there a place that has a special place in your heart where you've been on this international journey?
That's a question that almost everybody asks. What's your favorite country? What's your favorite place? What have you loved most? But as educators, and I'm sure you read a lot of my articles, there's one thing that keeps you going, and it's the children in that classroom. And if I think back to all the different countries, from UK to Cyprus to Malaysia to Zambia to Nigeria to the Middle East, in terms of what motivates you as an educator is those children. In terms of location, I've always been fortunate enough mainly to work in international schools. Some bilingual, but mainly international schools. So the place then becomes a cultural experience. And it's very difficult to say that I prefer to working in Malaysia to Africa to even China. I mean, everywhere has just got a fascination. Honestly, everywhere is a fascinating. And as an educator, you're reborn every time you start working with a different culture and understand their cultural expectations and the cultural norms, and you learn how to adapt. It's just so inspirational. So, in short, favorites. I could find favorites in every single country. Honestly, it'd be very difficult to choose.
Now, you mentioned about networking and LinkedIn, and you do write extensively on LinkedIn, and particularly with a focus on, dare I say, ways that schools can improve. What would you say is the most important thing that schools can focus on right now to improve?
Well, look, I think a lot of my articles focus on the simple paradigm shift because we're still, even since the 80s when I first went into teaching, and we were looking at empowering students to become self-regulated learners and to learn by inquiry. Um, it's now many, many years on, generation on, and yet still in schools we're finding that they're making the many schools are making the curriculum as an excuse for an impediment to learning and blaming heavy content, etc., in terms of the barrier to being innovative in the classroom. So I think if there's one thing I would really recommend schools, and through my experience to consider, is don't be slave to the curriculum. Right? It's the children that drive the learning, and focus the learning, and allow the children to be innovative. Create them time to learn in their own ways. I mean, I've just come back from a year 7 class where I'm teaching some science now, and 50% of the class are completely don't speak English, and I was teaching them space and the universe and the Milky Way. And this is today was just I've just come back from the end of my second week, where they presented their findings on the universe. And this is grade 7, where the expectations were very low. And what came out of it astounded me. Language was no longer a barrier. The second language students were able to produce and it wasn't a PowerPoint even, it was just some kind of, one of the students produced some kind of 3D show showing all the planets weaving in and out. And whereas 2 weeks ago we'd brainstormed about the planets and they couldn't even name them. Now they were talking about, the number of moons that Jupiter has and Plato not being a planet again. And the conversation came from the students. The inspiration came from the students. I didn't use one PowerPoint. I didn't use one book. I used inspiration. The curriculum, in terms of expectations, was exceeded way beyond expectations. I didn't focus on language impediments. I focused on the learning and the new learning. So in other words, everything for them was new. Curriculum was not a barrier. I got them to self-assess and peer assess. And they were probably more accurate than me because they assessed each other. And when they presented, they then said, what would you give this? Oh, I think, and they were given really, these are year students, and even the Chinese students, they were helping paraphrase each other. So the assessment was authentic. The presentation was there. They had created and self-assessed themselves, and there was no pressure at all to cover any kind of curriculum. In fact, it had been exceeded. But most important was they had learnt a lot, right? They had learnt a lot, and it was authentic, and it was enjoyable. And I think if there's one message I would give to schools is stop PowerPoints. Books are fantastic resources. But I'm sure you're going to ask me a bit later, do we need books? It's a good question. Of course we need books, but the curriculum is there. Allow the students to be creative and learn the curriculum and use their own skills to move forward. It's all about learning, not about teaching.
And that is quite a paradigm shift. Do you think that, just on that, did we miss an opportunity with the pandemic when we changed school quite rapidly for a short space of time? Did we miss out on an opportunity there?
Well, David, we did miss an opportunity, and we're continuing to miss an opportunity because this was a fantastic opportunity that proved in the best schools that learning happens. Learning happens despite this delivery style of teacher being at the front, being the knowledge bearer, open your textbooks, cover this exercise, and students having the autonomy and the freedom to learn things and research things for themselves and still prove the evidence of learning. In fact, many of my students when I was in Kosovo was online, and I was teaching at that stage AS biology. And these were Kosovan students that were quite low ability, but 2 years later, I hear that one of them got a very high IB and made it to top dentistry college. She was the product of the pandemic and self-empowerment, and was able to take advantage of that in developing her own talents and not being subdued by teachers and tests and stress, and blossomed. And within those 2 years, for her, it was a fantastic success. COVID was a success. But very, very quickly, many schools have reverted back to the concept of, and dare I say it, they're talking about lost learning. Now, if you think about that concept, lost learning, how can you lose learning, right? In other words, what they're talking about is we haven't been able to cover what we wanted in our curriculum as teachers. The students haven't stopped learning. They've probably learned more than anything in terms of understanding the pandemic, different ways of learning, global changes, enormous amount of learning throughout that. But to be able to revert back to schools and put the pressure on students, after being maybe up to 2 years online and cause stress for these students, is indeed a lost opportunity. Again, it relates to the paradigm shift. If the paradigm shift was let's capitalize on the learning that happened through the pandemic, let's look at the learning that happened and look at the evidence of learning, and now let's build on that, then I think we'd be way more forward. Way more forward.
Indeed. Now, perhaps the next, say, opportunity or maybe a forced paradigm shift is going to come maybe with the development and the introduction of AI into schools.
Yeah.
Do you have any views on AI at the moment?
Well, David, yes, I've also been writing a lot about this because, I mean, how long have we had internet for? How long have we had Google? And there's always the mindset in teachers that say, look, don't use the internet. You must use the book, and you must use this book only, and don't use your iPhone or don't use your iPad. You must use this, and you must use my notes. Now, let's now embrace real life. Right? Let's embrace our youngsters. Many of our 16-year-olds, 2000, if I get my maths right, 2007, they were being born. I don't know what iPhone we were on by then. So they were born into the iPhones and probably the iPads. Certainly, I recall my own daughters, my daughter who is now a clinical psychologist in Cyprus. She had her first Nokia phone, I think. She's now 29. And they were using, I think, MSN or something at that stage. So they were using internet at that stage, right? And then eventually Google came, and Yahoo, and multi-satellites, and all of this stuff. So we're surrounded by technology, and our children are born into technology. Now, learning obviously happens, and it happens through technology, and they know how to use it. Again, I was on one of the whiteboards this afternoon, fumbling along with my fingers on this touch screen, and one of the year 7 students came up. Give me a minute, sir. Boom, boom, boom. And he fixed it, right? He fixed it. So AI, well, look, AI, Google, AI, yes, you can ask it. You can ask Siri, you can ask anything for the answers. But does that alter the fact that if you're assessing your child, you need to know your child? If you're setting an assignment that can be written by a computer or by Google, and you're using that for an assessment, is that the child's fault? Right? If I went to learn Chinese and I was surrounded by Chinese students, and you gave me a challenging assignment, and I thought, right, I'm completely stuck here. I'm frozen like a mouse in the corner. I think, so what am I going to do? Google, AI, right? So I'm going to be innovative, and I'm going to try and find some ways to get out of this hole using my skills, and maybe Chat GP would be one of the options if that's the way you want to assess me. But more authentically, if you want to assess me by talking to me and discussing my understanding and getting me to peer assess or assessing other children, doesn't matter what technology you have, because the understanding of real life learning is internal. Um, you can't get a computer that goes inside you and speaks. Well, I hope not yet, but that's not happening. You're still breathing, you're still emotional, you still have to apply the learning to your own situation. When you're learning science, you still have to know why you've got a heart and what happens when you run. Of course, AI can, but if I then say why, or suddenly talk to you and say, describe, explain this to your partner, or uh, that's what real learning is. It's human. So I think it's a fantastic tool to have because it will continue to evolve, like much how the technology will evolve, but will never replace authentic learning, authentic teaching, and the teacher that's passionate about teaching children. It will be an aid for them if they look at it positively. Banning it is like banning a mobile phone or telling your kids not to use the iPad when you're out for a meal. How many of us succeed to do with doing that, right? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because they're going to find ways of getting through it. And why shouldn't they? Because they're going to be innovative and we want them to be innovative. Why shouldn't they? So I think it is a positive move and that schools should embrace it. But going back to my original, change your paradigm, change it to learning, not teaching.
Yep. Yeah. At a minimum, at least, perhaps the end of accessible homework, perhaps that might be a move in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Wanted to ask you, so in your career, what is your most proud achievement to date?
I mean, look, when you're in a classroom, you get this buzz all the time in terms of achievements. So it could either be achievements in terms of us inspiring students and teachers. And I've developed many friends over the years where I've inspired colleagues who are still in touch with me. And it's just about being there for them and listening to them. I had one colleague in collegiate American school. I spotted, I was doing learning walks and I could see he was an outstanding practitioner. The students were just all over the place and learning, focused. And so I had a chat with him and I asked him what his ambition was. He said, I want to go into leadership. He was an American chap. And he was inspired by the fact that I recognized his talents. And he used to pop in for a couple of minutes. I was quality assurance director at that time. He used to pop in for a couple of minutes every other week or send me a message. What do you think of this? And he'd worked it out for himself, right? But he just wanted to feed back on this. And how do you think about this? And he then managed to get a promotion. And he still kept in touch. Just sharing ideas, showing the passion, being listened to. Then he went to Kuwait. And I know that now he's in Abu Dhabi as a principal, but even still now we still catch up on the odd WhatsApp. How's it going? And he still asks for advice. Even now, asks for advice. Now that's inspirational, and I've got many colleagues like that in terms of developing individuals, and many students like that. So perhaps they're the magic moments in an educator. In terms of leadership, many challenging roles. And I think perhaps my most memorable, I was working in Dubai, and Dubai is very rigorous KHD inspections, good to outstanding. All lessons must be good or better. All teachers must teach good or outstanding lessons. And that was great because I had great support in a fantastic school, and it was the first IB school that wanted to get to outstanding. So wonderful leadership there, wonderful group to work with, and we focused on just basically three different things. We focused on making the curriculum accessible to every child. right? At that time, I created the concept of learning ladders, which then became a business somewhere else. But anyway, at least we inspired the idea. So the idea was that students knew what they were to achieve, and this concept of students achieving their own expectations. We then used GL assessments, CAT4, cognitive ability tests to know the potential of each student, so that teachers would know the potential. And we used a literacy, because literacy was the biggest barrier to student learning. So we assessed their literacy, again, through GL and GRT once every term. So we were able to track their evidence of learning and put into practice any intervention. Now, we also trained the teachers. So we had a leaders of learning program. So we identified our best teachers. And this was a great company, Malcolm Greenuff and Caroline Greenuff, who worked with me and Interventures. And we developed this leaders learning program, Insight. And the idea was, when we found outstanding learning going on, we then got them to peer with each other. And they then peer taught each other. And then we then met them as a group, shared ideas. And I think we introduced a number of good teacher or good lessons observed from, it wasn't me, but there was another quality assurance colleague working with me. I think it was from 20% to 70%. And we were on this project for 2.5 years, and we had to prove that 75% or above lessons were above expected. Progress was 75% above expected. Attainment was, and it takes a long time. But I did hear that the year after I had left, that the school had achieved, the first IB school had achieved outstanding. And I think everything that we'd put in, it was absolutely worth it. And I think for me, that's memorable. The whole collaborative approach, the whole focused on student learning, the whole teachers working together, people from external coming in and assisting us and giving us their knowledge. It was just a stunning time.
Tassos, is there anything now that you're working on that you're excited about?
Well, look, very much with the IB. And when you go to a different school, you have a different scenario. And again, a different culture of a school. So in some ways, you have to step backwards to move forwards. And certainly here in China, innovation is happening in IB schools, but they do have the strength of outstanding students who, when you finish the lesson, they don't want to leave, right? These are the kind of students, so they're happy to go home at 5:30 and then start their homework at 6:30. And indeed, if you forget to give them homework, they will remind you, right? But the focus I have had in this school has been, again, very, very basic, is to improve student interaction. So we've gone back to the think, pair, share strategy because students are not very good at interacting, and trying eventually to get them to present is a skill that they will learn very, very quickly, and they have learned very quickly. They've proven, but it's not common practice. And even though it's an IB school, the methodology is still very, I suppose, 80s. They're still very heavily reliant on textbooks and content. The other focus I've been working on here, again, very, very basic, is identifying end-of-year literacy expectations. And we've managed to do that so that the students are able to measure their own literacy expectations. And they're based on National Curriculum Australian and British. And we simplified them so that it's accessible to all students and parents. And the move is that these literacy expectations are used in every classroom. So every class teacher is a teacher of literacy. Because otherwise, 90% of the talk amongst the students is Chinese. We're a bilingual school, very little international students, so we've got to encourage them to speak English. I think the most important thing is, the message I'm passing on is that in every school there's a different culture, and as a leader, you have to lead by being led by the students and by the cultural needs. You need to have the armor to be sensitive to the cultural needs, the student needs, and be able to then implement the ways forward of what you think is the right thing, but sometimes may not be perceived as the right thing. Very much also in India, where still they believe that regular examinations and testing is the way forward. And of course, they would always say that's always been successful, and they have been successful. And even here in China, they've always been successful, and they have been successful in that methodology. So it's a certain tightrope between my passions for innovation, plus also recognizing actually that still works, right? That still works.
Now, at this point of the interview, I usually ask, how can people get in touch with you? But I think I already know that answer, Tassos. Now, you're very active on LinkedIn. You have
Yeah.
a big following. And I just want to ask you, like, how much do you enjoy using LinkedIn to connect with educators, and perhaps sort of share how you see it as a beneficial platform for teachers?
I thoroughly enjoy it. I really do. And, I think I've done probably about 80 to 90 articles at the moment because, I find it inspirational to hear from fellow educators and the good practice that's going on in their schools. And it helps me also grow. Um, and I think this is very, very important for us as educators. And it also reinforces to me that as educational leaders, we're all actually rowing in the same way, the same direction. We're all talking about the same thing. And just to get that commonality and networking is really quite refreshing. And even if it's just a few comments on each other's work and the recognition of each other's work, it's quite inspirational. I certainly get motivated by it. And I hope that by trying to give back to the followers what they want to hear is something that keeps me going. And I try to sense that from the feedback, the questions that I get asked. And usually a question that asks me and challenges me inspires me into writing another article.
Mhm.
It's a fantastic forum, which I hope will evolve even more in the future into more real networking opportunities where we really do communicate, because I think we're very much alone as educational leaders, even globally.
Yeah, now I've been following you for a long time on LinkedIn. In fact, it goes right back to we almost crossed paths in person. We were in the same room. You were presenting at a conference in Hong Kong, and I remember thinking, gee, I really enjoyed what you were talking about. I actually looked you up afterwards just to sort of pass. I think I sent you a message saying thank you for your presentation. And since then, have followed you and really enjoyed your contributions that you make. So
Okay.
thank you for that. And of course, thank you so much for your time here today. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, David. I think what your initiative is quite inspiring. I think if this kind of platform raises an opportunity for fellow educators to communicate or even have shared discussions and podcasts where we can globally meet other teachers and share our experiences, this could be a phenomenal way forward. And I mentioned with LinkedIn, they do. There is that attempt to collaborate by putting at whatever,
Mhm.
but there's nothing like this personal contact and personal discussion. And talking about technology, we now have the technology to do all of this. In fact, we have more than enough technology to do this. And I will reinforce that globally, um, you can feel like you're in it alone.
Mm.
And a bad day in leadership or in teaching, you just feel that, it's the worst day ever. But when you're able to share these experiences with colleagues and find out that actually it's fluid. You have great days with students and great days with teachers and great days, but there are better ways of doing it. And, it's a passionate way of looking forward. I think this forum can really have a major impact on the field of education. So I really thank you for your initiative, David, and I hope that we get a chance to speak again.
Indeed, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, and look forward to crossing paths in person soon in the future. Thanks, Tassos. Education Talks is an Ed Events production for the Ed Events community. You can keep up to date with the development of the community by registering on the website at ed.events.